It's my pleasure to kick off the fifth and final workshop in the MCN Pro workshop series. And today we're going to be exploring digital project management. And Carolyn Royston is from the Imperial War Museum, and she is going to be leading us through today's workshop series. So Carolyn.
Thank you very much, Susan. As Susan said, this is our final MCN Pro Series workshop this year, and this session is focusing on digital project management. I'll be hosting this workshop throughout the session today, and I'll be joined by my two co-presenters and some special guests via video. Just to explain to you a little bit about the workshop, we have a new 90-minute format for you, in which you're going to be guided through both the theory of project management, but also, we hope, some very practical insights for you to apply to your own projects. And what you should hear today, we hope will be applicable for all digital projects, large or small, and can be used within any organization. Please, throughout the workshop, if you can think about your own projects, think about what you've got going on at the moment in your organization, I think this will be really helpful. We'd encourage you to actively participate throughout the session. So throughout, we'll be asking you some questions and also asking you to answer some polls for us. And we'd also really like you to post some questions along the way in the chat box that you've already been writing in, and we'll try and pick those up as we go through the workshop, and we'll also have time for a Q&A session towards the end. As Susan said, if you'd like to tweet about the session, you can use the hashtag MCNPro, and we really encourage you to do that. And above all, we want you to have a good time on this workshop and enjoy it, and we hope that you learn a lot along the way. So moving along, I'm going to introduce you now to, that's me, I forgot to put that on, there you are, and our facilitators. So Simon Delafond is Digital Projects Manager here at the Imperial War Museum, and Simon works with me in the Digital Media Department. And Charlotte Sexton is formerly Head of Digital Media at the National Gallery in London and is currently Vice President of MCN. Both Simon and Charlotte have significant experience of managing digital projects of all sizes in both the museum sector and beyond, and they'll be walking you through some of the key aspects involved. Now, I mentioned that we had some video presentations as well, and alongside Simon and Charlotte, we're also going to be hearing from 4 guest contributors who have very kindly given up their time to contribute to this workshop today. Christina De Paolo is, or was, I think, until very, very recently, Director of Digital Media at Balboa Park Online Collective, and based in San Diego. And Christina managed the development of digital projects for all of the organizations based in the park, and so has real insight into the complexities of different clients and working across a wide range of projects at the same time. We also have Peter Gorgels, who is the Internet Manager from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And you may know Peter through his role in the development of the Rijksmuseum's highly acclaimed website, and also Rijksstudio project, which was launched last year. And from Australia, we have Johnny Brownbill, who's Manager of Online Development at Museum Victoria in Melbourne. Museum Victoria is a multi-site organisation, and Johnny manages all of the in-gallery multimedia and online. And finally, we get some insights into digital media at Tate London with Tiana Tasic, who is the digital project lead. And I should also point out that you have an extra special guest on these videos, which is me, as I pop up in some of them from time to time. Hopefully it won't be too off-putting for you, but we recorded these videos using Google Hangout, and the camera sometimes pointed at my face as I was listening intently. So just to say, there isn't a technical error, it's just me. So let's move on now to what we're going to be covering in this session. So the first part of the workshop will be all about the role of the project manager, and looking specifically at the attributes and qualities that make a good project manager. Then we'll be moving on to focus on context and methodologies and tools that can help you throughout the life cycle of the projects that you're managing. And then we'll be looking at some tips and also challenges that will help you to, tips and strategies rather, to address common challenges that undoubtedly will appear in one way or another throughout your projects, and are common whether small or large. And then finally, we'll be offering you some advice and a Q&A session for you to pose some questions to our presenters. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Simon, who's going to kick this workshop off.
In fact, Simon's not going to kick this workshop off because he's just having some technical problems. So you've got to love digital media. So
it was all going so well.
It was going very well. So I'm wondering whether we should come back to Simon, but kick off with
Charlotte.
Some of our...
Should we go to Charlotte? No.
I'm not sure what's best to do.
Okay, sorry everybody, just bear with us for a second.
Why don't we move along to the videos actually, while Simon's getting reset up.
Okay.
Actually, I'm going to swap headphones, and I'm going to get Simon set up here.
Hi. Okay. So sorry about that. Yeah, my computer just crashed just as I was about to start talking. So it's a good start, but it's all right. It's under control. Okay. So I'm just going to start seamlessly as if that never happened. So my name is Simon Delafond. I'm the Digital Projects Manager at the Imperial War Museum, as Caroline said. Previous to that, I used to be the editor of the BBC History website. And before that, I worked for a bunch of digital agencies in London. So I've done sort of project management, has been part of my role for about 15 years or so. I've also done Prince 2 training and Agile training as well, and we'll come on to methodologies a bit later on. Although actually I've used Agile more in my work than so that's me. But I thought it would be useful if we hear from Christina and Johnny about what they think digital project management actually is. So I think we've got some videos lined up.
Management is being responsible for implementing a project, usually something that is created with digital media for public use. So we need to keep in mind that there's going to be a real person that hopefully is going to be benefiting from what you're creating or producing, and what a project manager is responsible for is creating the project from the very beginning to the very end. And when I say beginning, it is maybe brainstorming the idea, getting funding so that you can do the project, and also putting a team together that would implement the project. The end really used to be when you launch the project, but now sometimes a digital media project might not really end. It's something that you launch, and what you might launch is just a prototype, and that you continue to work on the project and sustain it and update it and improve it over time.
In my organization, I make things for screens, computer screens and tablets and phone screens and screens in galleries as well. They're not physical things, but they're used by people on or with physical things. So the way I see project management is I bring together a team of specialists. Actually, they're teams of specialists, and I connect them to make things. And at the end of the day, project management is all about producing a product. In our case, it's a digital product.
So you may have noticed there that actually they all had different job titles, and so you know, one of the things I thought would be useful to talk about first would be what's in a name, and actually the different job titles that you get in this in this industry, and the kind of the sort of subtle differences that between them. So so within a kind of digital media industry, there are sort of a significant number of project management responsibilities, and in a job title. And here are five that you may have come across: project manager, technical project manager, product manager, producer, and program manager. So they all do slightly different things, although often they're used interchangeably. So I thought it would be useful just to run through how I see them, at least. So first of all, a project manager. So the project manager, in my view, is there to enable a project to be delivered on time and budget. Now that might sound like a pretty obvious definition, but actually, really, there within that is this idea that they are focused on just on delivery. That's their job, is to bring the project in on time and to budget. And so they're not necessarily the creative lead for the project. And in fact, sometimes if they are, it can be to the sort of detriment of the project, as I'll touch on in a second. So the technical project manager, much the same as a project manager, but with the technical skills that are related to that particular project. So they are technical, but they're not a developer. They're not actually building the site. So a product manager and a producer, they're largely interchangeable, but they're subtly different from a project manager, because actually these roles own the creative vision for a project. So they're the people who actually make decisions about the design and functionality, and often inform decisions about the technology that's used. They are often also responsible for delivering the project. And actually having that dual role of deciding functionality and delivering a project, as I say, is sometimes to the detriment of the project, because actually they're sort of pushing into different directions. The person who owns the creative vision is generally pushing for more and more features, making it better and better, and a project manager is pushing for it to be delivered on time and budget. So in my experience, at least, the most successful projects work when those functions are actually separated into two different jobs. So the final one of these, program manager, this is quite simple, really. I mean, this is just the person who manages multiple project managers or anyone with these sorts of job titles. I suppose the other aspect to that job, though, is that they're often involved in the genesis of a project. So before a project has started, really, its inception. And that idea of the genesis of a project is something that Charlotte's going to talk about a bit later on. Now, it's worth saying as well that the role that you play on a project, or the job title that you have, as I've defined them here, might change in a single job that you have. So and often that's defined by the genesis of the project. So actually, what I find at least is that I move between these roles, and in fact that's certainly the case at the moment. The projects that I'm working on, I play a different role depending on the project. So I'm sort of moving, at the moment I'm moving probably between being a project manager on one project where I don't have the kind of creative vision for it. I'm making it happen, and another project where actually I am. It's my idea. It's a thing that I'm trying to see through. So it's worth saying that just because you might have one particular job title, you can move between the different roles. So it'd be interesting to see how you describe yourselves. So I think we've got a poll that would be really good if we could get your input in. Ah, interesting stuff. Okay, lots of others coming up there. It'd be really interesting if you could put them in the chat window to see what other job titles you have and whether you think your job fits any of those descriptions that I've defined previously. Okay, so before we start to explore the kind of qualities a project manager needs, I wanted to break out some of the key responsibilities of the role. For those of you who don't describe yourself as a project manager, this next slide should give you a good idea about the scope of the role. So project manager's job is to develop the project plan and scope, define objectives or KPIs or key performance indicators. That might be web analytics. You might use web analytics to find those out. So they're things like page views or dwell time. To assess and mitigate risk. To estimate and allocate resources. To acquire project assets. So that means get the resources that are required. So images or designs or coding. To assign tasks and direct activities. Obviously, that's really crucial to being a project manager. To control project execution. Now, that sort of depends on the methodology used, and that's something that Charlotte will be talking you through a bit later on. But and so that sort of happens in a different way. But it's about being in control of the project basically, and saying this is the phase we're in now, and we're moving to this phase. And related to that is to track, report, and forecast progress. And similarly to analyze the results based on what's been delivered. But also to manage the quality of the project as well, and to manage any change or issues that happen. So we're going to turn to our videos again now and find out what our contributors think are the 3 most important attributes of being a project manager.
Digital media projects can be complicated, and they can contain team members who do not have a lot of experience working with digital media and might have some trepidation or some issues and not really understand it. And they might not be comfortable articulating what they want, as some of your other team members might be very good at articulating. So you need to be able to listen to what people are saying in a conversation that might have 3 or 4 people and be able to ask questions and confirm what they're talking about so everybody can understand each other. Number 2 is the ability to be flexible and adjust. That is something that is a big demand right now with the digital media projects I work on, is that the environment and the issues that you're facing within your projects change weekly, daily. Something can be different. You're working on something in the morning and it's different in the afternoon. You need to be able to adjust and communicate those changes to all your partners and make decisions fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. The third and last important attribute is to be able to follow up. It's very easy to let things drop, especially when you're working on a project where you have to do something quickly. It's very complicated, and when people say, let's do this, you have to make sure that they're actually going to do it, or you need to assign tasks to make sure everything gets done.
What are the three most important attributes of being a project manager? I think the first one is understanding the project. I've worked on projects where other people have managed them, and they haven't really understood the platform, the digital platform, and that makes a difficult project. They might understand the industry, they might understand other types of projects, but if they don't understand the digital project, that's a signal that there might be a bit of trouble. Obviously, in all projects, communication is key. So if you can't keep everybody in the loop, if you can't communicate your ideas and your expectations to the team, then again, you'll be heading for trouble. And the last thing is stakeholder management. So we have quite a hierarchical organisation, and it's pretty common in our industry. And we need to make sure that our stakeholders, our management, our funders, and our colleagues are all part of the process of understanding what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, and why it's important that we do it.
That as a project manager in the digital world you tend to face. But some of the most common ones, I would say from experience, is setting the project scope and keeping to it for the duration of the project, no matter whether you're employing agile or waterfall methodology. The scope should not increase. It could change, but it should not increase. Secondly, it's really a huge challenge is changing priorities, which leads to the first point, and new projects starting before others have even finished. And lacking a clear roadmap is the biggest problem I encounter within working in the organization, different digital projects. And probably the biggest challenge is completely baffled senior management, where majority of them actually don't understand how to make decisions around the digital, and they just don't consult the digital teams and make wrong decisions all the time. I would say these are probably my top challenges I encounter as a digital project manager.
Some really interesting things, I think, some really interesting points there. So to summarise, I think those and some other things that we've been thinking of. We first of all had 5 key takeaways, but we've made it 6. So first of all, obviously, awesome organisation. So a natural born organiser. This is what we think the number one thing a project manager needs to be. Number 2, an excellent communicator at all levels. So and that's about managing expectations both up and down, and knowing how, really crucially, how to listen and how to ask questions of the people that you're working with. A point that Tiana made there about being flexible and being able to adapt as things change as well is really, really important, I think. Again, as I said, the communication is one thing, but actually that stakeholder management is really, really, really crucial to successful project management. Knowing how to deal with different stakeholders who have got different opinions and different skill sets is really essential. And then I mean, this is sort of, it sounds really basic, but just having the kind of tenacity to make sure that tasks get done, to see things through to the end is really important. So it's about tasks, but it's also about seeing the project through to the end as well. So those kind of individual things, making sure that they happen, but also making sure the project gets finished as well. So there are 6 key takeaways for the key attributes of being a project manager. So Charlotte's going to now talk about being a project manager in the context of a museum, and she's going to compare some project management methodologies too. So I'm just going to hand my headphones over to her. 1 second.
Thank you, Simon. So firstly, hi everybody. It's absolutely wonderful to be here with you all, and I'm particularly happy as the Vice President of MCN to have so many of you here on the workshop. My name is Charlotte Sexton. In my career, I guess, I've been responsible for both managing digital projects of all shapes and sizes, but also overseeing project managers as they've overseen projects themselves, and often within a large strategic program of work. And I would refute Simon's earlier comment about overseeing programs of work as being particularly easy. They come with their own challenges, I think. So during my time at the National Gallery as head of digital media, I've certainly had a chance to work on some amazing, complex and challenging projects. And I'm going to be sharing with you some of the valuable lessons I've learned along the way. So let's move on and take a moment to think about what it means to develop a digital project in a cultural organization. So I do think there are some particular issues and challenges in working within cultural organizations as opposed to the commercial sector or in other areas. And I think one of the kind of most obvious starting points is that projects can come from a number of different directions, and they may be both planned and unplanned. And I think if it's your responsibility to make sure these things get out the door, that does set a particular a sort of set of challenges as these things come and land on your lap. I think the other really striking thing, and something I've been mulling on over the years, is the challenges that come along from having colleagues who within the organisation that may have quite a low level of digital literacy. So I'm often kind of finding myself in a position of sort of translating or buffering and compensating for a lack of knowledge or specific expertise in this area. And of course that's doubly difficult because everybody who works in a museum tends to be a specialist in their own right. And so there's a certain negotiation that's needed there. The other thing that I'm very aware of is the challenge of meeting deadlines. And I think this is in part because there are only some activities in a way that have very firm deadlines that absolutely can't be missed. And of course, everybody within the organisation has their own sets of priorities. And so trying to do that negotiation to get people to deliver and to deliver on time is a constant exercise for the project manager. The other thing that I think is where you have a kind of real clash here is about the speed of delivery that digital projects often require as opposed to non-digital projects. You know, if you think about an organisation that may spend several years planning for an exhibition or a building development, that's not going to map back against potentially a digital development where actually speed to get it out the door is going to be incredibly important for you. For a number of reasons. Coming back to digital literacy, and this is understandable, but people are often very put off by technical language or jargon, and I think this is something very much to be guarded against because you can find people closing down on you simply because of the way you're talking about something. And I think this is a real exercise in demystifying and simplifying what you're saying to make it completely understandable. The other really important aspect of working within a museum or a gallery is very much about the requirement to find a way to work cross-departmentally. And sometimes, you know, you're really cutting against in some organisations, very entrenched views, and it's sort of being quite siloed in their operation, or very focused on their own activity. And of course, in doing that, you're also hitting against differing sets of ambitions or agendas for these resources. Most projects, it's almost inevitable, are going to require a range of resources from across the organisation. And I think this is particularly challenging if you find yourself working on projects that aren't necessarily deemed as strategic or haven't been given top priority. And there you're going to have to really be great at negotiating to get all the resources you need from across the wider organisation. In an ideal world, digital is always going to be part of a wider program of activity, but sometimes it's not. And it's in that scenario you're going to find yourself trying to work alongside a multitude of competing activities. And of course, it's almost inevitable that there will be an incredible focus on launch, but in fact, the launch is only the beginning, and actually one of the biggest things I think people struggle to really understand is that your project has to be sustainable, and you have to think about how it's going to work in the long term. And of course, I have examples at the gallery of putting in digital installations that nominally had a certain lifespan, but in fact technology is sweated often very hard in organisations, and you find yourself in a scenario where you might have something continuing to be used long after you thought it might have been retired. So let's move on and think a little bit about how do projects come into being? What is the genesis of a project within a museum? So let's think about some of the drivers. So I've mapped out a few. I'd be interested if you can think of any more. So the first one, I guess, most importantly, is strategic. And I know both at Imperial War Museums and at the National Gallery, we were both fortunate to have developed a strategic plan. So we understood how big projects were going to fit together. You may have planned projects, but not necessarily within a formal strategy. The next one I think is quite tricky, which is opportunistic projects, and that might come on the back of funding or partnership work. And the challenge there is you don't always know when they're going to come into being. My personal one that I hate most of all is when somebody else has promised your resource for a piece of digital delivery that you're completely unaware of. That's often quite challenging and frustrating at times. And of course, the last one is the very, very important person wants it. Possibly one of the most political on the list, and can cause you all sorts of problems. So let's look at how projects get approved. If you're in a fairly hierarchical organisation, it may be through the trustees or the senior management. You may have to build a detailed business case for it, and that gets reviewed and accepted. You might have a funding application approved, in which case suddenly money becomes available. And of course, last but not least, that VIP can make all sorts of things happen. So I'm very curious to know how it works in your own organisation. So we have a very quick poll. Wow, 100% funding driven. That's pretty unambiguous. Oh no, we're shifting. Okay, that's interesting. So funding, absolutely a major driver for you. Strategic, great to see you've got strategic down there as well. That's wonderful to see, and I love the vanity and political projects. Love to be able to find out a bit more about those. So moving on, very curious to know when you've reflected on those, whether you think any of those are more or less likely to succeed. Oh, it's great to see content-driven coming up in your answers there. Forget about content, but strategic. Very, very interesting to see that. Okay, so now that we've thought a bit more about the museum context and about how projects come into being, I wanted to give you a bit of an overview into some common methodologies which can be applied to digital projects. So the next section is really a bit of a primer on three common project management methodologies. We're going to be looking at Prince2, Agile and Waterfall. And I'm going to give you a bit of a high-level overview of these key differences. And we're going to take a look at their pros and cons. And inevitably, there always are pros and cons. And finally, we'll take a moment to think about how you might decide which one you could apply most usefully to your project. And I may call on Simon and Carolyn just to double check I've covered all the aspects, because as Simon is more familiar with Agile than I am, he may have some useful insights for you. So before we get, leapt ahead. So before we get into the detail, I think we had a poll just checking whether you'd actually used any of these methodologies. Yeah, I think we do, and Susan's just going to queue it up for you. This is really helpful to understand where you are in terms of experience of using any of them, or none of them, in fact. Okay, so we have a few people in the audience who haven't had a chance to use these, so I think you'll find the next section pretty informative. Otherwise, for those that have used them, it looks as if Agile's tipping out as the one most heavily used, and Prince2 least of all. So, okay, I think we should move on and let's try and unpack these a little bit. Okay, so let's start with Prince2. It's the one that you responded that the least number of you had worked with. Okay, so Prince2 is a formal accredited qualification. If you do the course, which I think takes around a week, you will acquire either a foundation level or you'll become a practitioner, and therefore be a certified Prince2 project manager. So this is really for people who are going to be professional project managers, or it could be helpful if you are actually going to be managing a project manager with this qualification, because you'll be familiar with the principles of it. So this is one I've probably worked most with during my time at the National Gallery, and it's been especially applied to sort of large-scale complex projects, which tend to have long schedules and significant budget attached to them. I've certainly used elements of the toolkit myself, and have managed project managers who've been Prince2 trained. It's also a favoured methodology at the Gallery. I think it has been, because it can be applied to any large-scale project. So it could be anything, not necessarily digital, so it could be anything from a building development or to a technical infrastructure project, right through to, we used it when we redesigned the Gallery's website. So let's look at it in a bit more detail. So what exactly is it? So it's a methodology based on organizational structure. So this is particularly helpful because it means that people have defined roles and responsibilities during the lifetime of the project. And it does rely quite heavily on detailed documentation. So this would be things like a project initiation document, which would detail out the project, the scope of it, and how you were going to approach it. It might have involved developing a business case before you started. It helps you in managing risk and defining your quality for the product that you're going to be producing. And that's particularly useful en masse because it can provide transparency for the project, and it very importantly provides a record of the decisions along the way and makes explicit points of sign-off where authorization is required before the project can move on. It can be very business focused. It draws out the benefits of the project, makes it clear in terms of its objectives and how it fits into the bigger picture. It is quite large in scope, and here in the UK, certainly it is, because it's quite formal. It is favoured by the public sector here in the UK. If we look at some of the pros and cons, it is a structured approach for project delivery, and you can garner some comfort in that. It does focus on documentation, so you're certainly keeping a record and monitoring the project as you're going through it. This next one I think is particularly useful because it assumes management by exception, which approval for every last thing. And that's great because it gives the project manager some sense of autonomy and it lets the team get on with things. So that's a useful thing. It does provide a very clear definition on roles or responsibilities, so that's completely unambiguous. And that structure is entirely designed to support the project manager, which is incredibly helpful. In terms of cons, it does require can require a lot of work up front. You've got to do a lot of your thinking at the beginning of the project to get those key documents in place. In some scenarios, it can be overwhelming for the museum or for the project. You know, basically, if you're going to spend more time on the paperwork than getting the project done, then this is probably not the right method for you. It can be rigid, it can feel rigid, and I think that that possibly makes it unhelpful if you're actively trying to innovate in what you're doing. You're going to have a project board to deal with, and so they will need, and they're nearly always senior managers, so that's going to need some careful management in and of itself. And of course, in the wrong hands, there is always the risk that the methodology becomes more important than the project itself. I've seen some beautifully managed projects which actually result in some very dull end results. So, you know, there's something to keep in mind there. So let's compare this to Agile. So what is Agile? Well, as it infers, it's an iterative approach to project management. So this idea that you can work in short bursts of activity so that you get to a point where you can get feedback and respond to that feedback and iterate in how you're developing things. I think quite usefully it breaks the project down into smaller segments, and they may be very small segments, so it could be just as small as developing a bit of functionality. You don't get away from the documentation though. You do need some documentation. However, unlike Prince2, you'll be continuously evolving that documentation as part of the process of using Agile. So how does it work? So this diagram, I think, gives you a pretty useful overview of the cycle that you're going to go through. And this may not necessarily represent something enormous like I'm going to completely redesign the website. This could be that the users have made a requirement, a request that they want to, say, for instance, share a collection object more easily. So this activity could simply be looking at how can we make that possible. So starting at the top, you have your scoping and defining your requirements. You then move on to your planning and your design phase. Once you're happy with that, you go into the build in a sprint, and that sprint could be very short. It could be as little as a day or a week. The whole intention is to move quickly. As soon as you have something that is good enough, you want to get it to a point where you can get some feedback, and that may be from staff or from preferably the users, and to be able to respond. Depending on the feedback you have, you want to respond and go around elements of that cycle again. Or if you feel it's good to go, then you move to launch. So let's look a little bit more at the characteristics of Agile and start to think about the pros and cons of it. I think one of the best bits about it is really that you can work in shorter sprints, in shorter bursts of activity, and that's great because it makes a big job feel doable, and it keeps a sort of energy and momentum in, as you work your way through it. The other great thing about it is if you're going to fail, you're going to be able to fail quickly. You're going to be able to see what's working, what's not working, and you're going to be able to do it in a way that's both manageable and survivable. You're going to be able to iterate and feedback, and that's fantastic because it means you're constantly checking in with the people that are going to be using this, and that's going to give you a lot of comfort. And most importantly, because you're going to be making things quickly and they're going to be viewable and usable, you're going to be able to involve staff and the audience to test it. So in terms of cons, I think one of the biggest challenges, certainly in my experience, is it's demanding of stakeholders that they make a quick response to keep things on track. And sometimes that's challenging if you can't get hold of people, or if they're used to, having more time to mull things over. They're going to struggle with this method. I find also for me, in the few times I've used it, that I think it's quite difficult to see the big picture. It tends to be a very sort of granular process, and it's useful to be able to helicopter back and think about what you're going to end up with in the long run. And sometimes that's not always as clear as you would like it to be. The other thing is it's very tempting, and I know certainly in my experience of the museum world, reputation is important. People, on the whole, want to turn out something that's very polished, very finished, possibly perfect. And the notion of agile is that this is iterative. You're going to carry on developing it. It just needs to be good enough to get out the door, and then you'll carry on working. So that's a very different sort of mindset. But if you keep going around that loop, eventually you've got to decide when it's time to let go and get it out there. There's also that tension, as more globally, I suppose, between the notion of agile and agility and being nimble in the context of the museum. So let's think about waterfall. Now, I think if you find agile potentially a bit chaotic, then you're going to love waterfall. So this is dead straightforward. So the main thing about waterfall is it's a sequential approach. So phase 1 is followed by phase 2, is followed by phase 3. So very straightforward. And those building blocks, the key thing about them is that any one of the new phases is completely reliant on the successful completion of the one before. Again, you're still going to need, you don't get out of doing the paperwork, you're still going to need to do that. But it gives you a sense of how that's going to work. So let's look at the process in action. So here you have a cascade of activity, and if we start at the top, you have your period like you do in any other types of methodology, where you have to determine what are you going to make, what's the scope, what's the requirements. When you've worked that out, you're going to have a sign-off period. So somewhere in between that and the design phase, you're going to agree that's what we're working to. You're then going to start the design, and you may be working out wireframes, you may be working out Photoshop images to get a sense of the look and feel. You may even get to animated mock-ups to give a sense of how it's going to work. Then you're going to start building it, and you're going to work through any of those issues as you go. Then you're going to test it. Now, I'd hope you'd be testing a little bit further up the line, but you can see that actually you get quite a long way through the process before you really get an opportunity to put it in front of people to see how it's going to work. And then you move on to, if you've been able to successfully launch, into a period of maintenance. So it's sequential, design, build process, very straightforward. It's easy to understand the dependencies and the impact on delivery. So if you had an analogy of building a house, you put your foundations in, you build your walls, and then you put the roof on. Now, it's in this process, it's going to be very easy to spot when the project goes off track. If you're late in getting the walls up, then you're simply not going to be ready to put the roof on. Very straightforward in that respect. Let's look at some of the cons. So as I inferred, you can get very far down the track before you really know whether the project's going wrong. This is something I've experienced when I was doing the website redesign, is that it's actually in this method very likely that it will take a long time before you get anything that you can usefully show the stakeholders. So you may have many weeks or months in some cases before you have something tangible to put in front of people, and that has an impact on managing their expectations and keeping them enthused with the project. And I think most importantly, it is quite difficult to build in change to this. So if something comes up fairly far down the line, it means you either have to unpick or you have to start again, and that's going to add time and it's going to add cost to the process. So we've looked at 3 methodologies. That's great, but how are you going to decide? Well, I think it really could depend on the approach that you take to software development. So, for example, while I was at the National Gallery, there was only one internal developer available. So our approach was often to work with external suppliers as necessary. And there were definitely some challenges in working in this way. Not least was potential for a clash of working culture. So you often found, you were trying to deal with a mix of agile versus Prince or waterfall. The agencies were working remotely to the main team, so communication could be tricky, as in fact you need to be able to discuss issues every step of the way, and they'd often forge ahead and you'd end up with something you didn't want, or which was going to be quite costly to change. Which leads on to the fact that whatever method you apply, it has to fit in with the needs of the culture of the organization. It's hard to maneuver an oil tanker, for instance. So likewise, if your organization is very risk averse, let's say, then agile may not work for you if the preference is to work it out all up front, document it, and then deliver exactly as specified. The bottom line is it really depends on what you feel is you're comfortable with. What's most likely to lead you to a successful delivery? Perhaps Prince 2 is going to allow you to manage risk on your project more effectively, or it may come down to whether you have the right skill sets on your team to support the chosen approach. So for instance, if you've never used Agile and have no one in the team with the knowledge, then you could be setting yourself an additional a problem that you really don't need. In reality, having worked on numerous projects over the years, I think it will probably be some kind of hybrid approach using elements of one or more of these methods. And this is where I think some of the real project management skill and creativity comes into play. So I'm going to hand back to Simon now, who's going to take you through some useful tools. And so over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Charlotte. So Charlotte's talked a lot about methodologies and kind of conceptual ways of dealing with project management, but we thought it would be useful as well just to talk about some pragmatic things as well, some actual tools that you can use to help project management. First of all, we're going to hear from Tiana at Tate and her love of a good old-fashioned spreadsheet.
If I could give someone one piece of advice about digital project management, I would say do it with passion and get to know as much as possible about everyone in your team, everything that they're doing, and don't be a machine, be a human, be part of that team and understand what is achievable.
Actually, my favorite project management tool is a weekly meeting. and I'm just finishing up a project right now with the Japanese Friendship Garden where our core team has been meeting for over a year. Every other week we've been meeting. Really, through that bi-weekly meeting, we've developed great relationships. We have educated each other on the project, and we have had great follow-through. So right now, the in-person meeting is my favorite project management tool.
That I use on a project. Well, this is a tool that has been around for a while, and I've used it on a couple of projects, but in fact just recently I've decided that it's a really great tool, and it's Basecamp. You may know of Basecamp. It's a product by 37 Signals. It's an online product, which means that it's great for collaborating with people outside your own team. And I've been doing that recently on quite a few projects. But recently I've decided that it's such a good product that I've started using it internally as well. So I've got some internal projects where I have my team all communicating via Basecamp. And it's good because it really just gets to the basics. It's not too difficult to learn. It doesn't require you to kind of go through a lot of training. You can start up a project and everyone can feel really comfortable really quickly. It incorporates sharing of documents. There's a calendar function, to-do list that can be allocated by the project manager or actually between the participants, and milestones, which is a great one where we agree on who's going to do what by when, and everybody can see what's expected of them at a glance. So that's a great tool that I think you should give a try.
So if you've been sold on Basecamp by Johnny there, then Charlotte's going to do a sort of a more in-depth run through of that in a second, so you can kind of see in much more detail what that's about. And I'm going to talk you through another tool that's a favourite of mine, which is Jira, in a minute as well. But first of all, let's have a look at some collaboration tools, which can play an essential part in helping the team work together and in streamlining the way you manage communication, both internal and external. So I think it's really important to note here that, and as our contributors said, that some of the most effective tools are not, fancy pieces of software. They're just post-it notes and regular conversations and face-to-face meetings. So it's worth stressing that I think that's actually just as important as having a specialized software to do the job. But on top of that, of course, there are other tools that make your life really really easy. And my favorite actually is Google Drive and Google Docs. I think just the idea of having a document in one place that is shared between lots of people, that people collaborate on and add comments to, and so that you don't have to be constantly emailing the versions of the document back and forth, is incredibly useful. And obviously that's not exclusive to project management, but I find it absolutely vital to the work that I do. So those are the collaboration and communication tools, but there are also specific project planning tools. And so we've pulled a selection of them together here, and they're all linked to from the slide too. So when you download the presentation later, you can find out more about them. We haven't used them all, but we know people who have, and we've recommended them, so it's worth looking into. Many of these operate as cloud-based services, so you don't need to install anything locally, and they're priced on a subscription basis, so they can be very affordable if you don't have much money to spend. Others do work on the number of licenses you need, and so obviously you require more investment to get them in place. But if you're going to be running several digital projects over a significant amount of time, it may be worth getting something in place that you'll be happy to use on a regular basis. So I'm going to have a look at Jira now, and take you through kind of what that means and how that works. So Jira is predominantly, actually, it was designed to be a sort of software development tool. So it's the two things that work in Jira it's about projects and issues. But although it's designed for software development, actually it can be used for all sorts of things. So at the Imperial War Museum, we use it for the content team and the design team, and all of the teams, actually the marketing team use it. And because the thing that it's really good at is keeping communication in one place. And it means that we can track all of the information that we have about something, and we know where it is. We don't have to trawl through our inboxes to find the conversation that we know happened 3 weeks ago. So this is the project screen for Jira. So this is where you see all of the projects. And then if we click on one of the projects, then we'll see our project summary screen. So this shows you all of the issues that you have in a given project. And I'll return to this in a minute, and it might make more sense, but this is a very useful screen because it allows you to, at a glance, see how your project's doing. Basically, it kind of gives you an idea of what's happening, how many issues there are, how many there are outstanding, who they're assigned to, that sort of thing. So if we click on, let's say, the open issues, then these are all of the things that need to be addressed. So those issues are either new features that need to be added to the project, or perhaps they're bugs, or all sorts of things can be added to this list. You can also add an issue from this screen as well. So if let's go through the process of adding an issue in Jira. So you click on the Add button, the Create Issue button, and then you can fill in this form, and you can give it various attributes. So you give it a name, you can give it a due date, you can assign it to a different version. Most importantly, you can assign it to a person. So let's say for our website that we're making, we need this new feature which is to sort events by location. So we'll add that as an issue. And then what's really great about Jira is that you can then comment on any given issue. So let's say we've made this and assigned it to someone, so I can then add a comment that says, what locations do we need to sort on? And once that comment has been added, then actually the system then sends an email to the relevant people, so that they know that issue has been updated and there's more information that's required. And so someone might go back to that issue and add another comment which answers that question. And as I said, that means that all of the communication about that thing is in the right place. It's just on the issue screen. The other thing about Jira, which is really good, is it's about time tracking. So let's say we've given a bit more information about this issue now, and so a developer is having a look at it. They can estimate how long they think that feature is going to take. So in this instance, let's say we think it's going to take 2 days. I think it's going to take 2 days to do, and they start work on it. And then once they've done a bit of work, then they can log some time. So in this instance, let's say they log 8 hours. And then that means that that work that they've done is then logged on the system. So it says that they've done 1 day and 2 hours, and they've got 4 hours remaining. So that means that you can, as I said previously, it means that you can look at your summary screen and actually kind of get a sense of how it's going, and how much time's remaining, and whether you're on track. And the other thing you can do is then once the issue is resolved, once that feature is successfully been launched, then you can close that issue, and then you'll return to your summary screen. And if this was real, then you would see that this closed number of closed issues has gone up, and the number of open issues has gone down. And again, that means that you can kind of track the progress of your project. So I'm going to hand you back to Charlotte now, who's going to give you a bit more insight into Basecamp.
Hi. So, yeah, Johnny mentioned Basecamp in the video a little bit earlier on, and this is one I've used in lots of different situations. But I like it. I think it's quite a useful tool that, like many of the others, is a cloud-based solution. So it's a subscription service. It has a tiered payment plan based on the number of projects you want to have active, or the amount of storage space you want to require. But it is actually pretty cheap, pretty reasonable, and it's very easy to get up and running with it. So I'm showing you a dashboard. So this is a kind of overview screen of a number of different projects. So each one of these panels represents a different project. And if I can get my arrow to work. So if I was to click on one of these projects, we would go into a screen that would provide us with an overview for it. And this is a useful screen because it draws together all of the recent activity happening on that project. It's also possible to group together a number of different related files, and this is just hugely useful, so you're not having to dig around for things. They're all associated in one place, and it will accept files, PDF files, Word documents, spreadsheets, images, and so on. So it's pretty flexible in terms of what it can cater to. The other thing you can do with it is create events for your project. So you can give them a title and a time frame. You can add some detail in terms of a comment, and then you can notify the relevant person that you want to assign this to, and then they'll be notified by email. The event itself gets added to a calendar, and you can see here it's possible to create, to have several different project calendars being displayed at the same time. So this is quite useful for giving you a sense of an overview, a more global view of what's going on. You can also create to-do lists, and you can share, they may be for yourself, or you might want to assign them and share them with other members of the team. And you can also tick a task as complete when the work's been done, so you can track your progress in that way. This is a screen I like very much. If you happen to be dipping back in and out around a number of projects, this screen will give you a very useful update and overview about what's been happening most recently. So here's my my personal page, which gives me an overview of my own activity. And it will also show me the files that have been shared specifically with me. And then finally, Basecamp's also capable of sending out a number of different sorts of emails as notifications or updates straight into people's inboxes. This is especially useful, I think, for people who possibly keep a keener eye on their email than they do on Basecamp itself. So it's good for additional team members who maybe this is not the main thing they're working on. Then when you go into these emails, they provide you with useful links which will take you straight back into the relevant information on Basecamp. So I hope this last section has really given you a good sense of the type of tools that you can use. We'd love to hear from you, and I know there's been some chat going on in the sidebar for other tools that you like, but we're very interested to hear if you have any pearly words that we should know about. I've not heard of Pivotal Tracker. I'm making a note to go Google that. Yeah, loving Google Drive. I'm living and dying with Google Drive. Trello I don't know so well, but Dropbox has been hugely useful and certainly in the preparation of this workshop. This is really a good list. I think what we may do is just group these together at the end after the workshop, and we'll happily share this as a global list. I love it. We generally just yell across the office. Fantastic. So I'm conscious of time. I don't want to cut anybody off, but if you have any last things, put them in now. because we're about to move on to move away a little bit from the theory and the tools that you can use, and really want to start to explore some of the practicalities, especially the types of challenges you may encounter, and some ways to think about mitigating them. So let's kick off with some of our guest contributors and hear firsthand some of the common problems they've encountered along the way.
What are the most common challenges that I've encountered? Working on a new project, not understanding who we're making the project for. If you don't understand your audience, if you haven't got an audience in mind, if you don't know who you're delivering it to, how can you know if you've done a good job? I've worked on projects before where I've been asked to deliver a product without an audience in mind, and sometimes that product may not be very successful because we don't know who to ask. So that's the first one. The second one is scope creep. I think everyone's had this problem one time or another. You get excited about a project, you start the project, you think you've got it all under control, and then you decide you need to add a feature, or somebody comes and says, wouldn't it be great if we could do this? And how about we just add that bit? And that's a real problem if you need to keep on time and on budget. And the last one is underestimating what's needed to complete the project, resourcing. People, money, time, the three things. When you're negotiating a project, starting a new project, often a developer or a designer will say, oh yeah, we should be able to do that in 2 weeks. Don't believe them. Just work it through and understand exactly what it is you're asking and make sure that there's enough time for them. And the same with the budget and
There are many that as a project manager in the digital world you tend to face. But some of the most common ones, I would say from experience, is setting the project scope and keeping to it for the duration of the project, no matter whether you're employing agile or waterfall methodology. The scope should not increase. It could change, but it should not increase. Secondly, it's really a huge challenge is changing priorities, which leads to the first point, and new projects starting before others have even finished, and lacking a clear roadmap is the biggest problem I encounter within working in the organization, different digital projects. And probably the biggest challenge is completely baffled senior management, where majority of them actually don't understand how to make decisions around the digital, and they just don't consult the digital teams and make wrong decisions all the time. I would say these are probably my top challenges I encounter as a digital project manager.
The most common challenges we have encountered is to focus on real added value for the users. Big museum with a lot of different people, a lot of stakeholders. They all want different things, and they want always too much. So the challenge is really, the big challenge is to have a general view, general principles, and stay focused on that and make the right decisions to deliver real added value for end users.
So we've summarized so we can all have a bit of a recap. And I'm going to bring Simon in. Actually, I thought maybe we could just together talk through some of these and see if we can come up with some strategies for responding to them. So
yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so yeah, not having a clear audience in mind, in my view, I think is the cardinal sin on any project. And I think knowing how important it is to develop and design things with real people in mind, I think you're just setting yourself up to fail from the get-go if you don't do this. I've had it once or twice, and I've taken two approaches. One, I've absolutely put my foot down and said I don't really want to proceed with the project unless we clarify who we're making this for. The other time, and we managed to come to an accommodation, and in the other scenario, I actually just had to make some decisions about who this audience was, so that I could at least start directing the project towards somebody, and we could develop the designs and focus the testing on that. So whether it was the right audience or not, I think is a question mark, but I don't think you can really proceed without having that in place. Do you agree, Simon?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, you can't if you can't decide, if the project team, the stakeholders can't decide who the audience is, or if they say it's everyone, then you're kind of setting yourself up to fail. But I think, as you say, Charlotte, a really good strategy actually then, if you're making that explicit and you're saying we really need to decide this, and you're still not getting anywhere, one really effective way of doing it is saying, well, how about we focus on this audience first? And so you do actually say, that's your middle ground, that's your kind of compromise position, as you say, we're going to focus on this audience first, and we'll move on to the other audiences once we've successfully launched. And actually, the truth is that often people will just forget about the other audiences by the time you've launched, and so you can just do as your instinct tells you. But if that's not the case, or it's actually is legitimate that there are more than one audience, then that's a way of doing it kind of progressively, and rather than doing it all in one go.
We had changing scope come up a few times, and I thought Tiana's point was quite interesting, where you may change some of the scope and requirements, but you don't increase them. And I think that that's a really important point. And one thing, you know, in our homage to documentation that I think is quite useful is that you actually have to codify that. You know, you need to codify that right at the beginning. What are we building and to what kind of level of complexity? And get that signed off, because at least that gives you a starting point, which to kind of remind people, you know, the whole planning for the project was around a certain point. Okay, I'm conscious we want to leave enough time for questions. Simon, is there anything else on that list you think we must tackle?
No, I think actually a lot of the answers come down to the methodologies. Actually, I think that's, you know, a lot of ways of solving these problems come down to the different methodologies. So Agile, I think, helps a lot with those changing. If you think it's going to change scope and requirements, that's a way of dealing with it. But I know we're running out of time, so I won't say any more about that.
Okay, so cantering forward, we have some last words of advice, and I hope they're short. In fact, they are short. I've got the timings in front of me. So could we just pop up these last videos, please?
One piece of advice, this is what it would be. Keep your eyes on the intent of the project. What is exciting to you about this project? Why is it important? Why do you care about it? Why should other people care about? What is your goal that really excites you? That should stay with you from beginning to end. So when the software crashes, when the script isn't ready, when somebody's telling you they don't want to work on the project and it was a really bad idea, you're going to have to dig deep. And where you're going to go is really why this is of value. And that's going to kind of sustain you. So sorry to get a little woo-woo on you, but I think for me, really understanding kind of the mission for your project and how it's going to benefit the people who are going to use it, or the people that are spending all this money and funding on creating it, that's what's most important.
If I could give someone doing digital project management one piece of advice, what would it be? Well, it would be to include user testing throughout your project. Determine who you think the customer is and go and ask them about it and use their input to help shape the project.
One thing is focus, 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 and really have the guts to make difficult decisions, all with the principles and the general vision you have.
Okay, so I hope you appreciate some of your questions answered.
Okay, I'm going to come back in now. Thank you very much, Charlotte and Simon. We've had some great questions and some great chat going on throughout the workshop. There are a couple of questions that I've pulled out, which I think would be really helpful if you could just quickly cover. One was about aligning specific project management tools with particular methodologies, and whether there are, in some of those tools that you mentioned, whether you feel there are particular ones that go with particular methodologies. Simon?
Yeah, I think, I mean, certainly my experience of Jira is that you can use that for any of those methodologies actually, because it doesn't really it sort of I guess it works separately from the methodology. So as long as you're using the methodology, you can use Jira to make it work for you. I think some are more explicitly set up for Agile. So some of I think Trello we've talked about has kind of the sort of sprint boards that you would see normally if you were doing Agile, whereas Jira doesn't have that. But to be honest, you can kind of use the tools. You can make the tools work for whatever you're using.
Okay, and a very good question from Balboa Park, I think. Charlotte, any advice on breaking down information silos within an organization for greater buy-in to a project?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think this is where being a really excellent communicator comes in, because I think your ability to kind of really engage with people and to really empathize with where they're coming from is going to be hugely important, because you're going to have to champion the project on one hand, and the bottom line is you want to get it done, but you're going to have to engage people and bring them on side. And I think the best way of doing that is a little bit like Christina was saying, is kind of go and speak to them, be face to face. I think it's very hard to refuse somebody when they're standing right in front of you. So be prepared to do that and to keep on doing that, because you know, getting them on side at the beginning, you still need to have them on side by the end, and these projects can go on for a while.
I find there's a couple of good tips. I mean, one is to also really think about your language when you're talking to non-digital people. They can often feel quite intimidated and threatened by the technology, and it's really important that they understand the project in their own terms. And I also think sometimes just helping to show them why the project's important for them and how this project's going to help them does often get people's buy-in when they can relate it more specifically to their own job. Okay, well we're running out of time really, and there are still some more questions coming in, but I don't think we've got time to answer them now, unfortunately, through the workshop, unless other people in the other participants are able to respond, or Simon and Charlotte through the chat box. But I'm just going to move on now to the closing of this workshop, and just to cover really what I hope that we have done a sort of whirlwind tour of digital project management, and just to remind you of the areas that we've covered today. So we've looked at the role, taking you through various job titles, their responsibilities, some of the attributes and characteristics that you might find for those particular roles. Giving you some insight into the nature of a digital project in a cultural organization, and some of the challenges and opportunities that you might find as you work on your digital projects. We've looked at some common methodologies, including Agile, Prince2 and Waterfall, and we've given you a very quick guide to some useful tools which hopefully you will be able to access later through downloading this presentation. We've listened to some common challenges that we all share across these projects, and also explored some approaches to overcoming those challenges, and had a few final words of advice from our presenters. There's so much more to cover, obviously, but we hope that we have at least touched on some of the key aspects of digital project management, and that you found this useful today. And just finally, in closing, I'd like to do lots of thank yous. I'd like to thank, first of all of you who have participated today, and for all of your great chat in the box, and for your great questions, and for participating on the polls and being part of the workshop. I'd like to thank the presenters, Simon and Charlotte, and also all our virtual speakers who gave up their time for the videos. Learning Times for providing the platform, And also to say that MCN Pro Series will be back in February 2014 with a set of new topics to cover, so please keep a lookout for that. And also that there will be a survey on this workshop that we would really appreciate you responding to, as it is incredibly helpful in helping us to keep improving on these workshops. Also, that the MCN conference registration is open. The early bird is still available until the 15th of October. I really highly recommend you attend if you can. It's in Montreal this year, and it's got a fantastic program. And say thank you and goodbye from London.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for listening.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, everybody.
This is Susan from Learning Times, and I do want to remind you all that there is a discussion forum that's tied to this topic. So if you go back through your mcnpro.org website and act like you're going to access this session, you will see the discussion link, and that would be a great place for you to share blogs that you read and resources that you know of, and have a conversation about some of the issues that are left lingering that you're questioning. So marvelous job to all of you, and I hope to see the rest of you audience, dear audience, engaged in the forums. Thank you.